The Feast of Tabernacles is basically the sixth feast during the year. It occurs in the seventh month, which for us would be around late September, October, sometimes even early November. The Feast of Tabernacles takes place over basically 7 days, really 8 days, because the last day is the last great day, but it is considered a separate feast, and I have a different video on that one. The Feast of Tabernacles in Hebrew is called Succot, and Succot means what the Bible translates as tabernacles, which is kind of a strange word for us. A more normal, everyday word would be tents. Sometimes it's translated as booths or cabins, but a more normal word would be tents. And we're going to see from the verses in Leviticus 23 that it is referring to tents. And that's why I think that this feast really should be celebrated and kept in tents, meaning that people, when they sleep at night, they should be staying in tents, not in a hotel or some type of solid structure like that. There's certain meaning that we glean from this experience by keeping the feast in tents. I've kept the Feast of Tabernacles for about 20 years, over 20 years, and I've kept it in both very fancy hotels, in tents, in cabins, just about every way you could possibly keep it, to very rustic, primitive accommodations in South America, in Peru, which were really rustic and primitive. I really don't want to keep it like that again, but these experiences are actually really good because they help you to you learn so much about this feast, and that's one of the main meanings that I think that we get out of the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, or tents, is that the tent that we're staying in represents our bodies. Our bodies are like tents. Our spirit, and Yahweh's spirit with our spirit, resides inside of this tent. This tent, just as a tent, is something that is not something you would keep for your entire life, or that would last very long. A tent can collapse, it can be blown over by a strong breeze, and that's the way these bodies are. Sadly, most people, though, they put so much stock into this life and in taking care of these bodies so much. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be healthy and take care of yourself, but their health and their bodies are the end all. That's why we see so much plastic surgery and just so much concentration put on the body instead of on the spiritual aspect and looking on the spiritual side of things. And I think that's one of the lessons that we get out of the Feast of Tabernacles. And just the fact that it is called the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, or tents. If it had a different name, or I could see keeping it a different way, but because the very name of the feast is tents, or Sukkot, that's why I think we should stay in Sukkot, or some type of temporary dwelling. Now, some people will try to tell you that a hotel is a temporary dwelling for them because they're staying there temporarily. They're just playing with words. The definition of Sukkot that it's a temporary dwelling, meaning that the actual dwelling is temporary. It doesn't stay up permanently. It doesn't have solid foundations. And there's no way that a hotel is a temporary dwelling. A hotel or a motel or anything like that is a solid building. It has a strong foundation. It is not temporary. It's permanent. And maybe your stay there is temporary, but that's just playing with words. And that's not the true meaning of what Sukkot is. It's a temporary dwelling that can be put up and taken down. So let's look at some of the scriptures and see what it actually says there. It says in Leviticus 23 and verse 33, "Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's on the 15th day of the month, and you know these are lunar months. So the first day is a conjunction, or when you cannot see the moon, it's completely blacked out. But on the 15th day, halfway through the month, you have a full moon. So that's one way that you know that you're on the first day of Tabernacles, is you see a full moon in the 7th month. Like I said, it happens in around September or October, depending on the year. On the first day, meaning the first day of this feast, on the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. Verse 39, also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of Yahweh for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a Sabbath rest, and on the 8th day a Sabbath rest. So we see those 2 days are holy days, they're Sabbath, they're high Sabbaths, and you keep them like a Sabbath day, and you have services on those days. Verse 40, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim for 7 days. You shall keep it as a feast to Yahweh for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. So when should we stop keeping this? Never. It says it's a statute forever. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in tents for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in tents, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in tents when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your Elohim. So Moses declared to the children of Israel the feasts of Yahweh. So you see the reason, it says right there in verse 42, the reason we're keeping it in tents and not hotels is in memory of the way the Israelites wandered through the wilderness, and they didn't stay in hotels. They weren't at the Holiday Inn or the Hilton or the Hyatt or the Sheraton. They were in tents, and they were moved from place to place. They temporarily would stay in one place, and they had to pack it up and move their tents to another place, wherever Yahweh told them to go. And that's another important meaning for us, that we have to be mobile, we have to be flexible and ready to move where the Spirit leads us, where Yahweh tells us to go. And this is why I think so many people are losing the meaning, missing out on the meaning of the Feast of Sukkot when they're staying in a hotel or a cabin or wherever they stay that's permanent. Now, I'm not saying that in all cases that it's so bad and that to stay in those things. I just feel like you're missing out on part of the message. I'm not saying you can't have a good Feast of Tabernacles. And I'm sure even people could keep the Feast of Tabernacles in a tent and have a bad feast and miss out on the meaning. So it's not just that. But I think that it is a good thing to try, and you'll see that you really enjoy it. Some people also say that Yeshua was most likely born during the Feast of Tabernacles, either on the first day or the last day. You can read more about this in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 through 26. And then in the future, in the millennium, at the beginning of the millennium, we will be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles and all through the millennium. In Zechariah 14:16 it says, and it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says that those that don't come up, they will have a plague of no water on their country. It's very important, and this is in the millennium. So the Feast of Tabernacles has been kept for thousands of years. We are still keeping it today, and we are going to keep it in the millennium when Yeshua returns too. So why aren't you keeping the Feast of Tabernacles now? You should be. And you should get rid of your feasts that are inherited from pagan traditions that Yahweh never even instituted. Christmas and Easter and all of these pagan sun worship holidays. Learn what the true holy days are in Leviticus 23 and start keeping the Feast of Tabernacles the best you can. And then when the millennium comes, at least you'll have an idea of what it is.